All right, hi everyone. I hope you guys are having a great day. My name is Kimberly Brown, and I'm going to be your instructor this semester. So, to tell you guys a little bit about myself, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, which, for those of you who might not know, clinical psychology focuses on the assessment, diagnosis, and treatment of psychological disorders. So, that's what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up, like lay on the couch, talk about your mother kind of thing. But in my last year of grad school, they were looking for a grad student to teach a section of general psychology. And I thought that would be fun. I could do that for a semester and then get back to my clinical work. And so I was really excited when they chose me until the night before classes started when I realized I was terrified of public speaking, which I probably should have figured out before then, but I was so excited about the idea of sharing my love for psychology. So I will say the first couple of weeks of that first class were probably awful. I'm glad they weren't recorded. But after a couple of weeks, I started to feel a little more comfortable, and I had a moment when I realized I was having fun and I didn't want to stop teaching, and I haven't. And that moment was in 2013, and here I am. So I teach online for the W. I teach this semester, I'm teaching one class for the psychology department and one for the education department. But I also teach in-person classes for the psychology department at Mississippi State as well. Other things to tell you guys about myself, I am married. My husband Michael and I have been married for 12 years, and we have three incredible children. Our oldest son's name is Christian, our daughter's name is Maddie, and then my little one's name is Brandon. So I tell you guys about my kids because they're precious and I love talking about them, and they're the reason that I've got pound puppy stickers on the door behind my head that I'm trying to carefully block out. But no, I love talking about my kids, but also throughout the semester, I'm sure I'll probably make mention of being a mom, having kids, etc. Other things to tell you guys about myself, I am a Christian, and I mentioned that as part of my introduction because that's an important part of who I am. It's not something that's likely to come up again during the semester, but it's an important part of my introduction. And then also, what I usually tell students on the first day of class is that I have OCD and I take Zoloft for that. And that might seem like random information to share with my students and with all of YouTube. But I have a theory that if the mental health professionals are too ashamed to talk about their own mental health struggles, then we're hypocrites and we're contributing to the stigma. Also, I'm a lot more fun as a professor when I've had my Zoloft, so I do it for you guys, right? You're welcome. But no, like throughout the semester, I will say things like reach out, get help, find somebody to talk to, and I want you guys to know that I've needed to do that as well. Also, this is abnormal psychology. My background is clinical, so this is maybe my favorite class to teach. And then also, it's very personal to me, not just as someone who has studied disorders, but as someone who has lived disorders. And so, especially when we get to the chapter on anxiety disorders and OCD, you'll be hearing a personal thought on those topics as well. So I would really love to get to know you guys throughout the semester. That's challenging in an online class, but there will be weekly writing assignments where I'll be looking for your thoughts and opinions, and I think I'll get to know you a little bit that way. And also, if you would like to email me and introduce yourself, you don't have to do that, but that would be great. So throughout the semester, as we're going to be talking about the syllabus, one thing that I think is really important for you guys is personal responsibility. I think that's important in all of your classes, but I think it's especially important in online classes. So when we look at the syllabus, you'll see that there'll be a structure to the way things are set up, a consistent, reliable pattern there. But I am going to be looking to you to be personally responsible. So as your instructor, there are things you expect of me, right? You expect me to communicate the information clearly, to grade fairly, to answer your emails, to be a friendly human being. There are also things that I expect of you as my students. I expect you to watch the videos, take notes, turn in your assignments on time, communicate with me if you have questions or concerns. So thinking of this as a working relationship, I'm going to do my best to do my part, and I'm going to be looking to you guys to be personally responsible for your assignments as well. At the end of a semester, there may be one student that makes an A and one student that makes an F, and the difference between them is not the exams. They had the same exams, same assignments, same instructor, same syllabus. The difference is the personal responsibility that you put into it. So I think that if you're willing to apply yourself, you'll be happy with the grade that you have at the end of the semester. It is very important to me personally to be fair, which means that I'm going to give you guys everything that you need to succeed. There will be review videos, there'll be extra credit practice exams, there'll be study guides, things to help you. Having said that, in order to be fair, I have to give all of those things to all of my students. So at the end of every semester, I'll have a student who email me and just want me to bump them up, just give them points or create an extra credit assignment just for them. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys on the first day of class, I don't do that because it wouldn't be fair to the rest of my students if I gave some sort of special advantage to one student. So please, if you realize you have questions or concerns about your grade, come to me as soon as possible. If you wait until the end of the semester, at that point there may not be much that I can do for you guys. So that's enough about me for now, I think, as a brief introduction. The next thing we're going to do is to look at the syllabus, and then my plan after that is to do just a tiny bit of lecture so you can see what you guys are getting yourselves into. So let's go ahead and pull up the syllabus. All right, so I have the syllabus here. You can find this for you on the Canvas page for the class. That's also where you'll see the slides and the assignments. Let me know if you have any questions after you look over the Canvas page. So as I said, my name is Kimberly Brown. I hope to get to know you guys throughout the semester. The best way to get in touch with me is through email. I check my email regularly. You can send an email directly to this email address, or you can send me a message in Canvas. Either one of those is fine. I don't actually live in Columbus, and so because of that, I don't have specific office hours. But if we need to meet, we can, whether that be meeting in person or meeting virtually, we can do that. But I found that a lot of issues can usually be resolved through email, so there's my email address. You can see a little bit about my goals for the class. And so with abnormal psychology, of course, there's a level of understanding. I want you to recognize the symptoms. I want you to recognize how we diagnose and to know a little bit about how we treat. But I also want you to be able to see the subtleties that are involved here about ethical issues in the way that we do research. Is it okay to give a placebo, for example? We'll talk about that. Maybe ethical difficulties in the way that we conceptualize disorders. Is it ethical to tell a person that their personality is disordered? That sort of thing. And then also thinking about how cultural and social issues contribute to what we consider a disorder and how that might change over time. As far as required materials, this is an online class, so you need to have reliable internet access. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have internet at your apartment per se, but have somewhere that you can go to use internet access that is reliable. And as far as the textbook is concerned, this information is listed for you here. This is a really great textbook. I definitely highly recommend it. One thing I will say is that I like to test based off of what we've covered in lectures. So the notes and the lecture videos, that's where I'm going to primarily be drawing my tests and my assignments from. Having said that, a lot of students do benefit from having a textbook to read as well. So let me know if you have questions. That textbook information is here. You do not need any sort of access codes. So if you can find a version of the book that works for you, that's great. But we don't need any access codes. All the assignments are going to be completed through Canvas. Okay, so the way that the course is going to work is that I'm going to be posting lecture videos just like this one, and we'll get to the schedule in a second and we'll see how the videos and the assignments will go together. But with these videos, I'm going to be covering the slides that are posted for you in Canvas, and you can use those slides to take notes, Please send me any questions that you have about the material. I'm here for that. But the way I'm going to be getting the material to you is through these lecture videos. And then as far as assignments, there are two major categories, activities and exams. And then there's also extra credit that we'll mention in a second. The activities are writing assignments, and you'll see that there will be one writing assignment most weeks. So we'll get to the schedule in a second. There are 12 activities total, and I'm going to keep your top 10 activity grades, which means you get 2 drop grades. So sometimes students will forget to do 1 or 2 or not get full credit on 1 or 2, in which case that's where the drop grades can really come in and help you. Or sometimes students get, full credit on the first 10 activities and then they skip the last 2 of the semester, just make your, things for you a little bit easier at the end. So each activity is worth 10 points. I'm going to keep your top 10 activities so you can get up to 100 points from activities. With the activities, I'm looking for a couple things. One, is your response at least 200 words long? It can be longer, that's fine, but at least 200 words long. So make sure you check your word count before you submit it. But for each one of these, there's going to be a prompt, and you'll see that when you open the assignment in Canvas, it'll have the prompt, but also we'll talk about it in the lecture videos. So for each topic, I'm going to be asking you to consider the information from the lecture videos and adding in your own thoughts and opinions there. I do not require that you use any sources other than just your own opinion and watching the lecture videos. But if you do use other sources, make sure that you cite those appropriately. And if you ever have any questions about whether you cited something appropriately or not, the best thing to do is to check with the professor before you submit it. Okay. So there will be 10 activities that will be kept, 2 activities that will be dropped. You can get up to 100 points from activities. And then there are 5 exams. Each one is worth 100 points, so you can get up to 500 points from exams, which means there's 600 points total in the class, 100 from activities, and 500 from exams. So exams 1 through 4 will each cover one section of the class. So we'll have the first section, exam 1, second section, exam 2. Exams 1 through 4 will be multiple choice, true, false, and matching. So when you open those, you'll have 75 minutes to complete them, and you need to take the entire exam in one attempt. Okay. Now, the final exam, exam 5, is going to be different. It's going to cover a variety of topics from throughout the class, and it will be a take-home essay format so that you can open the assignment, work on it, save it, come back to it. You should also be able to do these with the activities as well. I believe you should be able to open an activity, maybe type on it some, and then just save it, but don't submit it. Come back to it later. Just submit it when you're done. But you can also get the topic for the activity from the lecture videos and type up your response before you even open the activity as well. But if you have questions, let me know. So 5 exams total, up to 500 points from exams, which means there's 600 possible points. If you want an A in the class, you need to get 90% of those points. If you want a B in the class, you need to get 80%, so on and so forth. I also do allow extra credit, and there are a few different ways to get it, but you can only earn a maximum of 15 extra credit points, so keep that in mind. One thing that I do, I have practice exams. Now, there are 4 practice exams because there's one for each of exams 1 through 4. Each question has, or each exam, practice exam has 8 questions. The whole thing is worth 2 points, and there are 4 of them, so that's 8 points total that you can get throughout the semester on the practice exams. So there is a little bit of extra credit, but the main point of the practice exams is to help you prepare. So when you know exam 1's coming up, then you start studying, you can take the practice exam, and that'll give you a little bit of an idea of what some of the test questions might look like and how prepared you are, that sort of thing. Also, we're going to talk about the attendance policy in a second, but you have to do an authentication video. But why not go ahead and give you some extra credit for that? So students who submit their authentication video on time and follow the instructions will get 5 points of extra credit for that. And then there'll be at least 1 extra credit writing assignment in addition to that. Okay, so as far as the attendance policy goes, Students need to complete at least 50% of the course to receive any kind of credit, which means that you need to complete at least half of your activities on time. So in an online class, it's tricky to measure attendance, but if you're doing the weekly writing assignments, then that counts as attendance for me. You do get 2 drop grades, but if you start to miss more than 2, it's going to start hurting your grade, and if you miss more than half of them, then you won't have been considered that you attended the class, right? All right, now as far as identification goes, the W requires that students who are taking online classes verify their identities. One way we do this is that you have your own unique password. The other thing we're going to do for this class is going to be an authentication video. So you'll see this assignment in Canvas, and you can go in and submit the link to your video for extra credit. What I'm going to ask you to do is record just a brief introduction video. You can tell me, maybe your major or what you want to do when you graduate, or do you have pets or hobbies, or just a little something about you. Now, one thing to note is that I'm the only person who's going to watch these videos. They're not going to be shared with the other students in the class, and they're not going to be shared with other people either. So just be aware of that. The way that I ask you to do this is to upload a video to YouTube and then give me the link to it. And when you're doing your video, set the video as unlisted. That way, the only way someone can watch it is if they have the link. You'll have the link, I'll have the link, nobody else will have the link. After I grade it, you can delete the video if you would like to. But if there's another way that you prefer to get the video to me, like I've had some students email me the video directly, and if that works as far as technology is concerned, then that's perfectly fine with me as well. Now, with your video, you're going to need to show a valid ID. So usually students either use their MUW ID or their driver's license, but make sure that you are carefully covering up your information. The video is unlisted, so nobody else should be able to see it, but still, just in case, cover that kind of information up. There we go. All right, so as far as makeup assignments go, if there's some sort of extraordinary situation going on, then I'll be happy to work with you. But it would have to be a pretty extraordinary sort of situation. So the activities are going to be open they're all going to be open from the beginning of the class, and we'll talk about that. But they're going to be open for several days. The exams are also going to be open. So maybe if there's a situation where like a student is hospitalized or having to travel, dealing with a death in the family, that sort of thing, then if you'll contact me, I'll do everything that I can to help you with that. As far as communication goes, the best way to get in touch with me is through email. I'll also be sending out emails, reminders, so make sure that you're checking your email. I will respond to your emails as soon as possible. This is a completely online class, which means that all you really need here is reliable internet access. Having said that, I do want to make sure that you guys are being careful with your internet access. If you are feeling ill, don't go to campus and go to, a place to use a public computer. If you're sick, let me know and I'll do everything that I can to work with you. But we're going to try to limit exposure, during this time period. And not just COVID, but nobody wants the flu either, that kind of thing. All right, so as far as the academic integrity policy goes, you can read this here. What does academic integrity look like in this class? One, you need to do your own writing assignments. So the activities and also the final exam, that's a take-home essay sort of format. I'm looking for your opinions and information that you learned in class. You do not have to use other sources. If you do use other sources, you must cite those sources appropriately. Not only that, but you also need to make sure that the majority of your response is your thoughts, not another source. For example, if there's an activity that needs to be 200 words long, and you turn in a source, you cited the source appropriately, but the vast majority of it was somebody else's thoughts, then there's not enough original work there to get credit. So make sure that if you do use sources, you use them appropriately and make sure that there is a good chunk of it that is your own original work. And please, it's fine for you to use the textbook. If you use the textbook, cite the textbook. Please do not copy word for word out of the textbook. Right? If you have questions about whether or not something is academically honest, let me know. Also, when you are taking the online exams, I'm fine with you using your notes and the textbook if you have the textbook. Please do not use other internet sources or other people. Okay. All right. As far as accommodations go, I'm happy to help in any way that I can. Just let me know. There's a policy here where students go through a process. You meet with a student support specialist and they come up with an accommodation plan, and then they send that to me, and you can let me know if you have thoughts on that as well. But this is the way that we do this, is coming up with an accommodation plan. All right, Title IX, MUW has a Title IX policy here really intended to keep the campus environment free of harassment and discrimination of any sort, but specifically here based on sex. I should note that if you feel like you've been the victim of something like this, there is information here about how to contact the Title IX coordinator. You can let me know as well if you would like to do that. What I should say is that as a professor in general, and a psychology professor in particular, students often come to me with their personal thoughts and concerns, and that's okay. I'm here for that. But you need to know that because of my position, I am a mandatory reporter, which means that if someone were to come to me with thoughts about hurting themselves or hurting someone else, or abuse of a child or abuse of a vulnerable adult, then I would have to report that to my department head, to the Title IX folks, just to make sure that everyone is safe and everyone has the resources that they need. So I just wanted you to know that that's a required part of my job, to make that kind of report. Okay. The academic calendar was updated after the semester was pushed back a little bit, so you can check that out. And here are a few dates that might be especially important to you. I do reserve the right to adjust the syllabus as needed. I don't really think that will happen, but 2020 taught us to be flexible. So here we go. All right, here's the plan. For each week of the class, pretty much, you'll have a video to watch and an activity to complete. You don't have an activity this week, the first week of the class, but then going forward, there's at least one time where you have two videos. I think this section here, I think I split these into two different videos instead of having them in one big long video. And I think that's the only time I did that, but I'm not 100% sure. So I'll be sending out weekly reminders, hey, you need to be watching this video and doing this writing assignment. Now, when you finish a section, like section 1, then you'll have exam 1, and this will be where you have the multiple choice, true, false matching. When you open it, it'll be open for 75 minutes. So you'll need to complete it during that time. Now, you'll notice that there are hard and fast due dates here. There are really two ways to progress through this course. One way is to follow at this pace. So you look on the syllabus, this is the week, I watch this video, I do this activity. Next week, I watch this video, I do this activity, so on and so forth. And progress at the suggested pace. That's completely fine. Another option is that you can work ahead, because I've set all of the assignments to be open from the beginning of the class. And I'm currently working on getting all the videos up so that you can watch the videos whenever you want to. At the moment that I'm recording this, I don't have all those done, but I'm thinking by the beginning of the semester I'll have that done, or very nearly done, so that you can work ahead if you want to. So if you say, hey, this week I've got extra time, I'll just watch the next 2 or 3 videos and do the next 2 or 3 writing assignments. You can do that and work ahead, because all of the assignments will be open from the beginning of the semester. What you cannot do is wait until the end of the semester to do everything, because there are hard and fast due dates. Like activity 1 is going to close at 11:59 p.m. on January 30th. If you want to do it ahead of time, you can, but you can't wait until after that time, if that makes sense. So if you want to progress at this pace, fantastic. If you want to work ahead when you have extra time, that's fine too. You'll see that this pattern will repeat, where we'll have a section where we'll have videos, we'll have activities, we'll have exam. And then at the end of the semester, we'll have that final exam that's a take-home essay sort of format, where you can open it, work on it, save it, come back to it. So you'll see when you look at the topics, I'm not able to cover every single chapter in your textbook or every single topic. Unfortunately, there's just not enough time. We start off with some kind of general information that applies to most of the disorders we're going to be talking about. And then around chapter 5, we start talking about specific disorders. So anxiety disorders, disorders of stress and trauma, etc. All right, well, that's just a quick review of the syllabus. If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, my plan for the rest of this video is to do just a little bit of an introduction here so that you guys can see kind of what we're going to be talking about this semester. So I'm going to go ahead and switch gears to lecture.
All right, so this first lecture video is really just intended to give you an idea of what you're getting yourself into in the class. So we're just going to get our feet wet a little bit, talking about a few general ideas about abnormal psychology. And so this lecture video, this part of the lecture, is going to be fairly short, but the next lecture video will be longer. So we're going to start chapter 1 during this lecture video. Next lecture video will finish chapter 1. So the purpose of today's lecture is to help you start to understand what do I mean when I say abnormal psychology, and why is it challenging to define something as abnormal. So first of all, one potential definition here, abnormal psychology could be described as the scientific study of abnormal behavior in an effort to describe, predict, explain, and change abnormal patterns of functioning. So right off the bat, a few things to note here. So coincidentally, the slides, your textbook, and my own personal view of abnormal psychology all kind of go together pretty well here, in that they tend to emphasize behavior. But what I want to say is that this does not necessarily describe everyone's view of abnormal psychology. So this definition talks about behavior. So we know that a person is suffering from a psychological issue if there's some behaviors that we would consider abnormal. We're going to talk about what that means in just a second. But another way of thinking about this could be more cognitions. So the way you think about yourself, the way you think about the world, could potentially also be symptoms you might see with someone who has abnormal psychology. So there are several different orientations, theoretical orientations, that we're going to talk about throughout the semester. Different psychologists having different ways of looking at these diagnoses we're going to be talking about. So I want to say straight off that there's no for sure definition of exactly what it is that makes something abnormal, and this is why abnormal psychology and clinical psychology can be tricky and can be relatively subjective at times. It says that few of our categories are clear-cut. They seem clear-cut. We would like them to be clear-cut. We have a manual called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And the purpose of that manual is to list all the different diagnoses that we could give, and then all the different criteria that a person would need to meet that diagnosis. So it sounds very clear-cut, but this is why it's not necessarily. To say that we understand abnormal psychology also means, follow with me here, that we understand normal psychology. To say you're abnormal means A, I know what normal looks like, and B, it's not you. So abnormal psychology, although it sounds clear-cut, it can be, first of all, from a research perspective, it can be difficult because you might have several different people who meet criteria for a particular disorder, like depression, for example, but they might all present in a different way. Abnormality does not always look the same from person to person, which makes diagnosis and research difficult. But also, there's an aspect of this that almost seems a little bit haughty here for us as the psychologist, to act like we understand everything and we've got everything together, and I know what normal is and I know what abnormal is. Spoiler alert, a lot of people go into psychology because they themselves have some psychological issues, or there's psychological issues in their family. I can guarantee you that my own personal psychological issues played a role in my choice of psychology. So what we want to be cautious with here is making it sound like the psychologist has all the answers, because we don't necessarily, and that could be off-putting to our clients. In addition to that, it's not just the fact of, do I really know whether what you're doing is abnormal or not? Even if it is abnormal, What are the dangers associated with labeling something as abnormal? So, for example, if we have a client come in and the client is clearly suffering from depression, what concerns might we have about labeling a person with depression? So there will be some psychologists who will say that we need a diagnosis. It's necessary for treatment, and it is. It is necessary for treatment. It is necessary for research, and oftentimes it's necessary for insurance to pay, so those practical things. Plus, the client wants to know what's going on. But what I want you to keep in the back of your mind is that there's also a danger here. If I tell my client you have depression, what will my client do with that information? Besides Google it, which, if you get a diagnosis, be cautious Googling, okay? There are some things out there that'll make it worse. But no, what will my client do with that? Well, sometimes if you tell a person they have a diagnosis, they start to identify with that diagnosis, or they start to think that that's all they'll ever be. And because I have depression, I'm a depressed person and I'll never be able to get better. And we create a self-fulfilling prophecy here, where you believe something is true so much that you make it true. And this might actually kind of decrease the hope that your client has about getting better. So, do we know what abnormality looks like? Well, not always. We don't have a firm definition. We have some pretty good ideas, though. Most of the definitions about psychological abnormality are going to involve at least one of the 4 Ds here. Deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. So we're going to go through and talk about each one of these briefly today. But you'll see this as this comes up. So later when we talk about anxiety disorders, we'll talk about how we know that anxiety is deviant. How is it distressful? How is it dysfunctional? How is it potentially dangerous? So these terms are going to come back up throughout the semester. So deviance, different, extreme, unusual, perhaps even bizarre. When we say something is deviant, we're saying it's different. Distress, so it's causing, usually we're thinking emotional here, emotional distress to the client, or maybe even potentially to other people in the client's life. Dysfunction has to do, just like it sounds, something is dysfunctional, it means it's not working for you. And then danger, we're going to talk about danger in just a second, so I'm going to hold off on that. All right, what do I mean when I say deviance? I mean that we are different. We're deviating from the norm here, okay? Well, different from what? Well, perhaps from the behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that society thinks is okay. So we have social norms. A social norm is kind of a written or unwritten rule about ways of thinking, ways of dressing, ways of behaving that are okay and that are not okay. Now, it's not like when we're born, we're given a manual that tells us exactly how we're supposed to act in every social situation. It's more like we watch other people when we grow up, and then we also get reinforced or punished. So if we do a behavior that is considered socially acceptable, then people are more friendly perhaps. People want to talk to us. People want to spend more time with us. If we start doing behaviors that are considered socially unacceptable, then we're punished for that. People don't spend as much time with us. People are kind of awkward or strange around us. So social norms are just those unwritten rules of society about, for example, holding the door open. Now, social norms can be not just universal, but oftentimes they are cultural and they're specific to a specific area. So in the South, it's very common to hold the door open for the person coming behind you, wherever you are. You don't have to know them. It doesn't matter. Is this a guy? Is this a girl? It doesn't matter. We hold the door open because that's considered polite. I have had students in the past tell me, though, that they have had some awkward conversations with people about this. People from different parts of the United States or people from different countries are wondering, why are you waiting on me? Why are you I'm capable of opening my own door. I had one male student tell me he held the door open for a girl and she walked through and then she turned around and said, "Just so you know, I have a boyfriend." Like, to her, it seemed flirtatious. She apparently was not raised in Mississippi, but to him it was just polite. So social norms are kind of what society says is okay and not okay. Now, this is where it gets tricky for psychology then. Does that mean we need a different manual for different countries? Some disorders are very specific to certain cultures. Now, there are some disorders that are fairly universal. So things like depression, things like schizophrenia, we find in roughly the same amounts in many different cultures. Now, the way they present may be a little different, but overall, we find them there. But there are some disorders that are very cultural specific. So, for example, eating disorders. So, eating disorders do not happen in all cultures. They're a relatively Western kind of disorder. So, perhaps because we have access to food, perhaps not everyone does. I want to say that in a very understanding way. I understand that there are plenty of people in our culture who don't have access to food, but generally speaking, our culture has access to food more than many cultures do. So maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's because of celebrities and Photoshop and pressure and teen magazines. I don't know. But we're going to talk about eating disorders later. But the idea is that eating disorders do not happen everywhere. They are culturally specific. So what you think of as abnormal may be based quite a bit on where you were raised and what kinds of people you spent time around. And that makes diagnosis difficult because as a clinician, you also have that experience. So you have your own understanding of what is socially acceptable alcohol consumption, right? You have an understanding, which is based on your own personal alcohol consumption, which is based on the people that you spent time around. It's based on the parenting, the culture where you were raised, religious beliefs, or whatever. So when a client comes in and they've been consuming alcohol and you're trying to figure out, is this a problem for this client or not, that can be difficult because you have your own personal understanding of what an alcohol problem looks like, and that may not be as accurate or as helpful for your client. So that's where having something like the DSM that has standardized criteria is very helpful. All right, and of course, if you have any questions or comments about anything during lecture, feel free to shoot me an email. So, according to many clinical psychologists, distress is an important one here. This is something that we're looking for. So when a client starts telling us about symptoms we're having, we're going to ask the question like, okay, well, how does that impact you? Like, how does that make you feel? And oftentimes clients will lead with that. Distress is sometimes visible. Sometimes you can see that the client is in emotional distress. And sometimes you can't see, but they'll describe to you what it feels like for them to have these issues that may be hurting their relationships and hurting other aspects of their life, which would be dysfunction, that we'll talk about in a second. But the dysfunction can cause emotional distress, right? But what I should say is that this is not always the case. So there are some individuals who would meet criteria for a diagnosis, who would need treatment, but would not be distressed by their situation. So let me give a few examples here. Pedophilia. Sometimes an individual who has some sexual attraction to children. Okay. In that situation, some individuals would be distressed by that and would come into therapy saying, I don't want this, we need to work on this, or whatever. But there would be some individuals who would have that attraction or would have that desire, whatever, who would not be distressed by it. But that does not mean that that's not a serious issue that needs to be addressed. So there will be some times when the distress they're causing to someone else, so if someone is being victimized, for example, then we would still say, even if the perpetrator was not distressed, this is still a problem. Another example here could be a substance use situation. So sometimes a person is not personally distressed. They don't feel like there's anything wrong with their substance use. It doesn't cause them any emotional. As a matter of fact, they may feel distressed at the idea of stopping a certain substance. But if there's some dysfunction there, if there's some deviance there, some danger there, or if they're causing distress to other people in their life, spouses, employers, other people, then we don't necessarily have to have distress in order to make a diagnosis. All right. So distress has to do more with your emotional issues that are related to the psychological problem. Dysfunction has to do with your daily functioning. So is the disorder preventing you from carrying out your normal day-to-day activities? So, for example, I have OCD, and I'm a clinical psychologist. So people come and talk to me about, or I have a degree in clinical psychology. I'm not practicing. People come up to me and want to talk to me about OCD. and I hear I have to make my bed before I leave in the morning. Does that mean I have OCD? Or I can't go to sleep if there are dirty dishes in the sink. Does that mean I have OCD? Okay. Everyone has some little quirks like that. And if it's not causing you any problems, then no, it's not OCD. Now, if it's 4 o'clock in the morning and you've been washing your dishes over and over again for 4 hours, that's something we need to talk about. If you're running late for class, but you've had to make and unmake and remake your bed 6 or 7 times, that's something for us to talk about. Because then it's causing you dysfunction. The problem with certain disorders is that they do take up a large period of your day just dealing with that disorder. Someone who has depression may not want to get out of bed. So the distress part is the emotional, I do not like feeling depressed. The dysfunction part is I can't do my job, or I can't carry on relationships because I have symptoms of depression, right? So it's interfering with daily functioning. Now, dysfunction alone is not necessarily enough to get a diagnosis. So you may just need some tips. We don't always have to diagnose. Sometimes the person just needs a little education, just needs a few tips. This particular behavior has not been working out for you. Let's think about ways we could substitute that with behaviors that would be more helpful for you. Psychologists could still help you with that, even if it's not something that necessarily meets criteria for a diagnosis. Now, the one that I think is probably the least well understood of the 4 Ds is danger. So this is kind of stereotypical. People often think when someone is diagnosed with a psychological disorder, someone's in therapy, there's a stereotype here that this person might potentially be dangerous. I want to say several things here. First of all, what do you mean by danger? First of all, even beyond that, do you mean danger to yourself or danger to someone else? Do you mean physical danger or do you mean emotional danger? So there are several different ways to unpack this. If you're talking about physical danger to another person, which is oftentimes what people are thinking about when they're thinking about psychological disorders, that's pretty rare, but not unheard of. So there are certain diagnoses that we'll talk about later in the semester that are associated with a risk of physically harming another person. So, for example, antisocial personality disorder, conduct disorder, substance use disorder could, depending on the situation, could fall in that category. There are some psychological issues that make a person more likely to physically harm another person. But we know there's more than one type of harm. There are also some diagnoses that make a person more likely to emotionally harm another person. So, narcissistic personality disorder, person who's very manipulative and has no empathy for other people. Like, you're going to get hurt spending time around that person, not necessarily physically hurt, probably not physically hurt, but emotionally hurt. So there's that. But then there also, on the other side of danger, there's danger to yourself. So if, for example, if a person has depression, or if a person has severe anxiety perhaps, or some other psychological issues, there's a risk of suicidal ideation, people thinking about harming themselves physically. And obviously there's a danger emotionally to oneself that kind of goes into distress. So there are several different ways to conceptualize danger. But yes, a person who has a psychological issue may be careless, hostile, confused. A person in the middle of a psychotic episode or in the middle of a manic episode, which if you don't know those terms, don't worry about it right now. You will know those terms by the end of the semester. But a person who's in the middle of one of those episodes can be harmful. And so, like, what if a person in the middle of a manic episode goes and spends all of his or her money? Was that dangerous? Well, it was dangerous to you financially. So there are many different ways to try to understand danger. But the classical person has a psychological problem, therefore they're going to go harm another person, that's pretty rare and pretty limited to specific psychological disorders. Okay, last couple things for this lecture video. I do want to introduce the idea of what do I mean when I say treatment. So hopefully from the 4 Ds, you understand what I mean when I say there's a psychological problem that requires treatment. But what do I mean when I say treatment? So once a clinician decides that there is something that needs to be treated, then there are a world of options out there for you. And the option that you choose is going to depend on several different factors. Once again, you're going to see this terminology here that's consistent with a behaviorist viewpoint here. The treatment, which we would call therapy, is a procedure designed to change abnormal behavior into more normal behavior. So from a behaviorist standpoint, which we're going to talk about all these terms later, that would be the whole point. Take the abnormal behavior, identify it, and change it. But perhaps someone who has a different perspective might not have this as their number one goal. Maybe their number one goal is to change the way you think about yourself. But changing the way you think about yourself also changes your behavior as well. So behavior change can either be something we go after directly or indirectly. Now you'll see this picture of this person here with a sledgehammer. Okay. What was going on in this picture was that there was a hotel that was being torn down. And before they brought in the professionals to demolish the building, they brought in lay people off the street, like, hey, you having a bad day? Here's a sledgehammer, go break something. And this looks fun, right? Potentially. Maybe you've had days where you really wanted to take a sledgehammer and tear up somebody's hotel room, perhaps. It's a attempted humor. Not a good idea. But no, here in this particular situation, they were encouraging people to do this. While that may have felt therapeutic to the individuals involved, it's not technically what we would call therapy for a few different reasons. Mostly because it really did not involve a healer. Now, these terms they're intended to be specific, or less specific, I should say. They're intended to be more general. So when you hear the word healer, as a psychologist, I wouldn't call myself a healer per se, but they're using a general term so as to include several different types of helpers here. So a sufferer is a person who seeks relief. So when we're talking about therapy, we have a person who is suffering in some way, whether this is emotional, whether this is dysfunction in their life, whatever the case may be. We have a sufferer who is seeking help, and they go to a professional. Now, when I talk about the professional healer here, trained and socially accepted. So what this looks like may vary depending on the culture that you're raised in, and depending on the area you live in. Living in a rural area would give you fewer options here than maybe living in a more metropolitan area, but a trained, socially accepted healer could be a psychologist. That's probably what you think of when you think of going to therapy. But it could also be, for example, a religious leader. So sometimes people go to a pastor for premarital counseling or just to talk about issues. So there are several different types of potential healers, but a person would not be qualified as a healer unless their expertise is trained. They're trained and their expertise is accepted by the sufferer and his or her social group. So what makes a person a healer? The sufferer thinks you're a healer. Obviously, there are some issues there. We certainly would want to be cautious about taking advantage of someone or trying to make it sound like we have credentials that we don't have. We want to be very cautious with that. So we have a sufferer, we have a healer, and there's a series of contacts between the two. Now, that's where we're really going to see some major differences in different people's perspectives on abnormal psychology. So what happens during those contacts? Some theoretical orientations are going to involve short treatments. We're going to try to solve this in 6 to 8 sessions, maybe less. Some involve longer series of treatments, so maybe we're going to meet for 2 or 3 years or as long as it takes. And then what happens during that session? So if you are going to be going to treatment, which I recommend, who can benefit from therapy? Trick question, everyone can benefit from therapy. But if you're going to therapy, not a bad idea to ask your therapist, like, what are your perspectives here? What is your theoretical orientation? We're going to talk more about that next time, so you'll get more of those terms. But trying to understand how the therapist intends to help you with your problem. So how do you see this problem? Is this a behavioral issue? Is this an early childhood issue? Is this a way of thinking about the world issue, that kind of thing. So what happens between the sufferer and the healer depends on several different factors, including what is the healer's theoretical orientation, how much time do you have, like is the sufferer like imminently suffering, like we're concerned that this person might be a harm to his or herself, or is the person moving, how many sessions can they afford to have, that kind of thing. What's the diagnosis, what's the problem? So several things to keep in mind. So last thing for today, we have this definition that sounds pretty vague, but relatively straightforward. There's a person with a problem, there's a person intended to help, and they meet with each other. However, there's all kinds of gray area there that we have to think about. So first of all, we have a lack of agreement about goals or aims. What are we really trying to do with our therapy? Which then leads into the successful outcome versus failure. If I don't have a specific goal, I'll never know if my therapy worked. So, for example, if a person is having an alcohol issue, is my goal abstinence? Like, we're going to stop consuming alcohol? Is my goal moderation? Like, we're going to continue to consume alcohol in a way that would be considered more socially appropriate and less dysfunctional? What happens if my client is drinking 12 beers a day and now my client is drinking 7 beers a day? Is that a successful outcome? So there's a lot of controversy over when should a person stop coming to therapy? When would we say they are, I don't know if I want to say cured or healed, but we'll get there in a second. But when have we done our job? And of course we need to know that. First of all, for personal purposes. As a psychologist, you want to be giving the best care possible to your client. You don't want to send your client home with subpar care. But also for our research purposes, we need to know if our therapies work. So what do you mean by work? What is the goal? So if a person is severely depressed and they come in to see a clinician, and when they leave they're mildly depressed, have we done our job? Was that successful? Or did we fail because there's still some symptoms of depression? So we have to think about what our specific goals are. Now, your specific goals will be impacted by yourself, but also by your client. So this is where you might ask the million-dollar question. If you woke up in the morning and everything was better, but you didn't know because you were asleep when it happened, but everything fixed itself overnight, how would you know things were better? In other words, if you had a miracle happen, how would you know that miracle happened? What would it look like? What would your life look like if everything was better? And so they might say, well, I'd have a good job, or I'd have a better relationship with so-and-so, or, I'd be able to get out of bed in the morning. Well, those are your goals, perhaps. So working with your client to identify your goals, that can help you understand whether you've been successful or not. And, ask your client, do you feel like treatment has been successful? Because if the client thinks it's successful, who are you to say otherwise? All right, a couple other thoughts here. Are we seeking to cure our clients? There has been a lot of controversy over whether we should see psychological care and physical care in the same way. If you go to a medical doctor because you're sick, you would want that doctor to cure you. But does that necessarily mean we should approach psychology in the same way? Well, there are different perspectives on this. From a certain viewpoint, sure, we would love to cure depression. What's the problem with saying we've cured depression? Well, several different things. One is that it's highly environmental. So we cannot, even if we help work with our client, give them coping skills, at the end of the day, there will still be risk factors in their environment. Things will happen that could trigger a relapse. So relapse happens. And so it sounds very dangerous to tell our clients they're cured and then have them be completely caught off guard when the symptoms maybe show back up. So on the one hand, we would love to cure our clients. On the other hand, we know that that's not always the case, and it depends on the severity, it depends on the specific diagnosis. We certainly do want to teach our clients. We want to teach them relaxation tips, coping skills, social skills. We want to teach them things they can use in the real world. Although, once again, we have to be cautious here to not make it sound like we know everything and we have all the answers, because I don't know about other clinical psychologists, but I don't have all the answers. And then finally, Are sufferers patients or clients? Well, it depends on the setting. So, for example, sometimes people have what we would call inpatient treatment. And if you're having inpatient treatment and you're in a hospital or other facility, you would likely be referred to as a patient. However, I was taught in graduate school to use the term clients, and so that's going to be second nature for me to use the term clients. Now, why do I use the term clients? Well, I feel like there's a certain stereotype associated with the word patient, as if someone they're ill and I'm supposed to be fixing you and I'm the authority figure and you're not contributing at all. You're just going to lay there and get the treatment. On the other hand, a client is someone who comes in and participates. If you're a client and you hire a photographer, you have a view of what you want and you tell the photographer what you want. And then the photographer's job is to make you happy with the services they provide, right? So how is that different from a psychologist? Well, if you're the client, you have an idea of what you want to be different in your life, and you bring that idea and you work with the clinician to achieve those goals. So the term client to me has a bit more dignity involved in it, and a bit more responsibility involved in it from the client needing to also participate in therapy, because treatment is not something that happens to you. It's something that you have to engage in or it won't be effective. Okay, so this has just been kind of an introduction to generally what am I talking about. When I talk about disorders, I talk about therapy. We're going to have a lot more detail, obviously, going forward. Our next lecture video is going to tackle some of the history of clinical psychology, which quite frankly is not all pretty. But we'll get into it. We have to understand our history to make sure that we don't repeat it. And then we'll also talk some about theoretical orientations. What do I mean when I say behaviorist? What do I mean when I say a cognitive view? That kind of thing. So obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. So just let me know if you have any questions, and then I will talk to you guys in the next lecture video. So have a great day.